Que el mundo es muy grande. No, cochina, ya no te quiero. Ya no te quiero. Ya miré que estabas comiendo la cagada de otros perros. Ya. Vete, cochina. Vete. A ver. Support. It lasted 5 years and ended in victory. Higher wages and rights to organize unions enshrined in law. Traditional unions were wary of migrant workers who were presented as threats to white employment. An earlier attempt by the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, AFL-CIO, to organize farm workers failed because the leadership did not understand local conditions or speak Spanish, and instead relied on familiar models from old labor campaigns. Despite having to work with a transitory workforce with a high turnover, Chavez saw the value of rooting the union in local communities, which offered educational possibilities, access to the church, and added to the tactical repertoire, for example, rent strikes. He could also use the example of the civil rights movement. How have Negroes won their battles? When everyone expects them to run, they kneel and pray. When they appear beaten, they turn their defeat into victory. They use only what they have, their bodies and their courage. We farm workers have the same weapons, our bodies and our courage. The day we farm workers apply this lesson with the same courage as they have shown in Alabama and Mississippi, on that day the misery of farm workers will come to an end. Chavez's strategy put him at the center of his movement. An iconic movement came in 1968 when his people were wearing a long strike that appeared to be going nowhere, and the value of nonviolence was being questioned. He embarked on a fast to reassert his authority, spiritual more than cohesive, and to demonstrate the power of suffering. His penitence was presented as a response to those in the Union who had spoken of violence. Mexican Catholics appreciated the symbolism and saw him to be suffering on their behalf, with ministers in attendance. The fast became a religious event. It had a galvanizing effect on the workers, many of whom made their own pilgrimages to the site of the fast. The advantages gained in strengthening union support were further reinforced when the grape growers, who apparently believed that the fast was a fraud, decided to issue an injunction against union tactics. At this point, this provided a fellow Chavez with a perfect opportunity to turn up in the courtroom, attended by thousands of praying supporters. When he ended his fast after 25 days, one day more than Gandhi's longest fast, he did so after an ecumenical service with a piece of bread handed him by Senator Robert Kennedy, about to declare his candidacy for the Senator Robert Kennedy about to declare his candidacy for the presidency. Minister read Chavez's speech. I am convinced that the truest act of courage, the strongest act of manliness, is to sacrifice ourselves for others in a totally nonviolent struggle for justice. To be a man is to suffer for others. God help us to be men. I am convinced that the truest act of courage, the strongest act of manliness, is to sacrifice ourselves for others in a totally nonviolent struggle for justice. To be a man is to suffer for others. God help us to be men. Alinsky was wary of piety. He told Chavez that he found the fast embarrassing, nor was he impressed by Chavez's insistence on living on a low wage, ensuring an appropriate level of suffering when he had a family to support. Eventually, Chavez's insistence that Okay, I read all this already in my head, but I'm going to do it again. I'll keep the whole video out loud. One of those who worked with Chavez, Marshall Gans, observed the importance of the initial motivation as a source of strategic creativity. Strategy did not come first, but followed the commitment to act, which inspired concentration and enthusiasm, risk taking, persistence, and learning. The intense interest in the problem at hand encouraged critical thinking, challenging expectation and context. Chavez provided the impetus, but he also had a view of organization that depended on strong leadership and in which the people who did not work made the decisions. This was far removed from participatory democracy, any sort of democracy really. Building a movement and running an organization were two different activities. In the latter role, Chavez became autocratic and eccentric, eventually leaving the UFW in disarray. Chavez remained an inspirational figure, and many of the alumni of the UFW went on to play important roles in other social movements. Nonetheless, he ended up destroying his own creation by purging insufficiently sycophantic staff. Imperfect communities, the natural imperfections of human beings were reflected in the rank and file as well as leaders. Perhaps Alinsky's most better lesson was that there were no natural coincidence of views between politically aware outside organizers and the communities they urged to seize power after 1945. The collective efforts of the revitalized Back of the Arts community were devoted to keeping out blacks. As Von Hoffman observed, once the area had been rebuilt and revitalized, it became a stable rock of racial exclusion. There was now something to defend. Even people who were not actively racist still believed that blacks coming into the community were harbingers of slummification, crime, bad schools, and punishing crops and real estate value.